This submitted material is a comprehensive exploration of using historical philosophy, ranging from Diogenes and Musashi to Nietzsche and Camus, to cultivate inner freedom, embrace solitude, and build unstoppable focus in the modern world. Harmonizing diverse philosophical schools into a single motivational message risks masking the fascinating, productive tensions between them.
I'm so glad we're starting right there, because while the text is incredibly rich with these towering historical figures, it runs into a real flattening effect pretty quickly.
Yeah, it definitely does.
The weakness here is blending cynicism, existentialism, and the path of the Ronin as if they all prescribe the exact same solution to escaping what the author calls the approval prison.
Right.
It's almost like taking ingredients for three completely different complex meals and just, throwing them all into one blender.
Yeah, you end up with a sort of philosophical smoothie. I mean, it tastes broadly motivational, but you lose the distinct flavor of the individual ingredients. The narrative glosses right over the fundamental, irreconcilable contradictions between these thinkers.
Completely.
For instance, the material treats Diogenes' complete feral rejection of all societal structure, ambition, and material wealth as perfectly synonymous with Miyamoto Musashi's rigorous, hyper-structured pursuit of martial mastery.
Which are wildly different paradigms for living.
Exactly. Those are not the same thing at all.
Absolutely. And then it attempts to align Albert Camus' belief in a completely meaningless universe with the text's later push to find one's authentic inner self through practices like journaling.
Wait, lift clause on Camus and the absurd for a second, just to make sure we're grounded here. Camus' concept of the absurd is basically that terrifying realization that the universe doesn't care about you.
Right. It's completely silent. It has no inherent meaning to offer.
Right. So applying that to the text, the specific weakness is that the author is trying to map that totally indifferent universe onto a very modern, almost cheerful self-help concept of uncovering your true self through morning journaling prompts.
Yeah, that doesn't track. If the universe has no pre-written script, there is no true self hiding under a rock waiting for you to uncover it.
You have to actively invent it.
Exactly. You know what would actually make this piece incredible?
What?
If the author stopped trying to make all these guys agree with each other and instead let them fight.
Oh, I like that.
The suggestion here is to lean heavily into the friction between these philosophies. Use that friction to stress test your argument and make the materials significantly more robust.
So instead of presenting these historical thinkers as a unified choir singing the exact same tune,
present them as a panel of experts with fiercely differing methodologies. You want to show the reader that there isn't just one monolithic way to walk alone, but rather a wide spectrum of choices that require deep personal calibration.
I completely agree. Let's talk about some concrete ways the author can execute that friction on the page. You could explicitly contrast Diogenes with someone like Marcus Aurelius.
Oh, that's a great angle.
Because the text already does a great job painting the picture of Diogenes publicly mocking society, wandering around Athens with his lantern in broad daylight to expose the absurdity of societal norms. He chose a radical, highly visible exit from society.
But what if you contrast that feral detachment with the quiet, dutiful stoicism of Marcus Aurelius?
That's a brilliant juxtaposition. Marcus Aurelius executed his philosophy while actively ruling the Roman Empire.
He was quite literally the center of the ultimate social structure.
Right. Show the reader how one man chose a radical physical exit from society, while the other chose radical internal boundaries while remaining deeply embedded within it.
By highlighting this tension, you aren't confusing the reader. You're giving them permission to choose the specific tool that fits their actual life.
Exactly. And building on what we were saying about Camus earlier, let's look at another concrete example of utilizing friction. Acknowledge the inherent clash between existentialism and modern self-help.
Don't hide from it. Frame these contradictions not as flaws in the respective philosophies, but as completely different tools the reader can pick up, depending on the specific boulder they are currently pushing.
Yeah, if you need to break an addiction to social media validation, maybe you do need the feral detachment of Diogenes.
But if you are trying to master a craft, Diogenes is terrible advice.
Right. You don't need to live in a clay jar. You need the rigid, unyielding discipline of Musashi's Dukkha.
Precisely. They are not the same tool, and admitting that on the page elevates the entire manuscript from a generic motivational speech into a highly nuanced philosophical toolkit. It would be incredibly empowering for the reader.
A circular narrative structure that repeatedly hammers the same anti-approval thesis dilutes the emotional impact of the historical case study.
This is a crucial pivot. It speaks directly to how the reader experiences the pacing of the manuscript.
Yeah, the structural weakness here is that the material loops through the concepts of the approval prison and the dangers of the herd repeatedly across its entire runtime.
We move from Diogenes to Nietzsche, back to the dangers of modern conformity, then over to Camus, and then cycle right back to the dangers of social media validation.
It does this all without any clear escalation in stakes. It feels like we're stuck in a roundabout.
Because we keep returning to the exact same baseline argument, that society demands conformity and we must resist it. The profound historical examples begin to feel a bit repetitive.
It blunts their impact. It's pacing like a single, sustained note of defiance, rather than a developing symphony.
You can almost feel reader fatigue setting in by chapter 4, because they are just staring at the same wall.
Right. So how do we break out of that loop? The suggestion here is to completely reorganize the historical figures into a progressive, 3-act journey of psychological evolution.
Instead of hitting the exact same note of defiance with different philosophers, use specific philosophers to represent escalating stages of the reader's journey from bondage to total freedom.
Give the reader a definitive path to walk down.
Hold on, I love this. Let's brainstorm this structure together. What would a concrete example of this 3-act journey actually look like? What is Act 1?
Let's call Act 1 the destruction of the false self.
Okay.
This is where you use Diogenes and the Cynic exclusive. Their entire purpose in this first act is to tear down the reader's need for approval and expose the absurdity of the tribe.
This act is all about the shock to the system?
Yes. You use the story of Diogenes telling Alexander the Great to stand out of his sunlight as the ultimate hammer to smash the reader's reliance on external validation, status, and material comfort.
Okay, and the key here is that once that false self is effectively destroyed, you close the act and move forward.
You don't bring Diogenes back again in chapter 5.
Right, his job is done. He was the demolition crew, which clears the stage beautifully for Act 2.
Let's call Act 2 the endurance of the void.
Oh, I like that title.
Because here's the reality the text currently misses. Once the false self is destroyed, the reader isn't immediately free and happy. They face the terrifying emptiness of that freedom.
Yes, the vertigo of having no rules. This is exactly where you bring in Sisyphus and Albert Camus to address the existential dread.
The reader is standing there without their masks, without their approval metrics, and it feels like staring into a silent abyss.
Camus teaches the reader how to endure that specific, terrifying climb. He shows them how to push the boulder of their own existence without the comforting illusions of the herd they just left behind in Act 1.
So Act 1 tears it down. Act 2 survives the aftermath, which naturally leads us to Act 3.
The creation of the true self.
Exactly. This is where we finally introduce Miyamoto Musashi and Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch.
Once the reader has learned to endure the silent void of Act 2, you show them how to build rigorous inner discipline and forge entirely new self-authored values in the aftermath.
Musashi's 60 duels and his path of walking alone aren't just about rejecting society anymore.
Right. They are about extreme self-mastery and creation. Do you see how much more satisfying that is?
It creates a highly propulsive, forward-moving narrative arc. Tear down, endure, rebuild.
The reader actually feels a sense of momentum instead of feeling trapped in a philosophical loop of just being angry at society.
Drawing parallels between extreme historical survival and everyday modern inconveniences occasionally undermines the gravity of the philosophical frameworks being presented.
This might be the most important adjustment for the author to make.
Yeah, the text beautifully and successfully explains the monumental, literal life or death struggles of these figures. You have Sisyphus cursed by the gods for eternity.
You have Musashi fighting 60 lethal duels where one wrong step meant getting cut down.
You have Diogenes living in absolute freezing poverty. But the weakness is that the text then attempts to apply these massive world-bending concepts to relatively low-stakes modern examples.
Right, it compares pushing the boulder to going a single day without checking social media.
Or applying Musashi's lone wolf mentality to wearing an unfashionable outfit in public.
Or ignoring a slightly negative Instagram comment.
Exactly. It creates a severe tonal dissonance. It inadvertently reduces these towering, formidable philosophies to the level of a digital productivity hack or a weekend self-help challenge.
It feels like bringing a bazooka to swat a fly.
So the suggestion here is to elevate the modern examples to completely match the existential weight of the philosophies being discussed.
Assume the reader you're speaking to is dealing with profound life crossroads and heavy psychological boulders.
Do not write for the reader who just wants to reduce their screen time. Write for the reader who is in the crucible of their life.
Apply the lenses of Musashi, Camus, and Nietzsche to the absolute highest stakes modern dilemmas you can think of.
Let's look at some concrete examples of how to execute this elevation, because getting this right will fundamentally change how the reader connects with the book.
Instead of applying Musashi's philosophy of walking alone to taking a weekend digital detox, apply it to a professional whistleblower.
Oh, wow. Yes. Picture someone sitting in a corporate boardroom. They realize they have to risk their entire career, their pension, their family's financial security, and their industry reputation to expose corporate fraud.
And they have to do it simply because their deeply forged inner code demands it.
They are walking alone in a modern setting, but the stakes are professional life and death.
That matches the energy of a Ronin. It honors the weight of Musashi's Dokudo. The reader can actually feel the gravity of the philosophy in that scenario.
Let's do Camus. Camus' concept of revolt and pushing the boulder is currently applied to surviving a boring office job. Let's elevate that.
What if you apply it to navigating the long-term care of a terminally ill loved one?
That's powerful. Demonstrate to the reader how one pushes that specific, agonizing boulder with dignity, with defiance, and even with moments of inexplicable joy.
Especially when there's absolutely no hope for a cure or a final summit.
That is incredibly poignant. When Camus says one must imagine Sisyphus happy, applying it to the unending, exhausting labor of caregiving,
where you wake up every day to do an impossibly heavy task that resets every single morning.
that elevates the philosophy from a neat, abstract idea into a vital survival mechanism.
Yeah, imagine reading that section as a caregiver. That gives me goosebumps.
If the author pivots the stakes to that level, this material goes from a motivational thought experiment to a literal lifeline for someone who is suffering.
And what if we looked at it from the perspective of family dynamics? We haven't touched on that yet. You could use Kierkegaard's concept of the dizziness of freedom.
The vertigo.
Exactly. The vertigo of standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing you can jump. Use that to describe the terrifying realization of a parent who suddenly sees that they must break a generational cycle of trauma.
They look at their family tree. They realize the tribe's way of doing things is fundamentally broke, and they must bear the absolute, crushing responsibility of creating an entirely new family culture from scratch.
That is staring into the abyss.
By elevating your modern examples to these levels, whistleblower, caregiver, cycle break, you completely respect the intelligence and the lived experience of your audience.
You ensure the philosophy retains its formidable power, rather than diluting it down to mere life hack.
It fundamentally shifts the entire manuscript. It tells the reader, I know you aren't just trying to optimize your morning routine. I know you are fighting a battle, and here are the weapons forged by history's greatest outsiders.
Absolutely.
To briefly recap the core of today's critique, this submitted material is undeniably powerful, deeply rich in historical context, and tackles the concept of inner freedom with a tremendous amount of passion. The source text does an excellent job of gathering some of history's most fascinating outsiders into one.
But to take this work to its absolute highest potential, remember our 3 actionable takeaways. First, explore and highlight the friction between the different philosophers rather than blending them together. This will create a much more robust and stress-tested argument.
Second, restructure the piece out of its circular loops and into a progressive 3-act journey: destruction, endurance, creation, to give the pacing a powerful sense of forward momentum.
And third, elevate your modern examples so they match the life or death stakes of the historical metaphors, ensuring the philosophy hits the reader with the gravity it truly deserves.
We highly encourage you to implement these high-level editorial shifts to your manuscript. Once you've reorganized the structure, leaned into the philosophical friction, and elevated those real-world stakes, please submit your revised work back in for another critique.
We would absolutely love to see how this material evolves.